to end TIFs. As Tom said, we've been around since 2013 doing work. And so what the idea is that we've moved from sort of educating folks, illuminating what's happening with the corrupt TIF practices and policies, and how they've been used to manipulate the body of politics for the few over the many. And so now we've moved into a campaign. Our position at Civic Lab is to end the TIF strategy, the scheme, put the money back into to fund public services like schools, parks, and libraries, and to, starting in 2021, do not have a TIF scheme in place, so that all those funds would go back into the units of government versus into the developers' hands. And so what are TIFs? You can go to www.tifreports.com. It's for a video primer and other background information. This is a great depository of information about all things TIF that we've been working on. It's a data store. It's breaking down the legal challenge. There's training videos. There's a 2018 TIF analysis every year under Tom's tenure. His crack team of volunteers, auditors, I call them forensic budget auditors, go in there and analyze all the TIFs data and put together a TIF illumination project on an annual basis, which breaks down the TIFs per ward and per area. And then it's also connecting, it loops back into our Civic Lab website, and you can get more information about what's happening with our TIF organizing campaign. Next slide, Tom. So now we're at the point of ending TIFs now. We have done the research, we've done the due diligence, evidence-based fact-finding stuff. You can check it out at www.endtifsnow.org. If you're interested in learning more, gaining more knowledge and understanding of how TIFs are destroying and harming our communities in Chicago. The idea now is to end it. We want the money, the $1.2 billion, to immediately go into supporting the people's COVID response, which is it's a strong list of public health demands. So we have actually $1.2 billion in cash that can be used to support all Chicagoans, and particularly those that are disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 response, the neighborhoods that are being hit the hardest. And so what are TIFs? TIFs are created by the municipality. They are state law. So it is a state law. It's then exercised and overseen by the local municipalities. So the state of Illinois established the TIF, and then for us, the city of Chicago is our municipality. And so the city council and the mayor are the ones who are supposed to be overseeing and managing the TIF tax increment financing scheme here in Chicago. They're designed to subsidize some business project in blighted and or underserved areas. So the whole purpose was to support business development and projects in blighted areas. TIFs have a metrics which include a but-for test. Ideally, they're supposed to support projects that cannot necessarily be supported in the general market by the current market economy. So if there's projects out there that aren't able to get off the ground and get built in these blighted areas, it's the but-for test that is applied to this. So there's a blighted and a but-for test that's applied, or it's supposed to be applied to all TIFs. TIFs generally capture the incremental property taxes above the baseline when the district was created. So the TIF commission or the groups established a district, and then from that point forward, for 23 years, that district is TIFed, which means that anything above the baseline, the assessed value above the base, it's the incremental property tax above that. And it's only for hard costs. So this is really about hard infrastructure in terms of buildings, malls, all that type of stuff. It's really not necessarily in place to cover the soft costs in terms of personnel and staffing, but really the physical infrastructure of neighborhoods. And then ideally, it is supposed to be, and we underline that, it is supposed to be collected where it's spent. It's supposed to be spent where it's collected. And so the idea is if you collect it in that district, you're supposed to spend it within that district. But we'll go over those, we'll go over that as well.
Okay, so that's the basics for TIFs. Now let's take a look at what happens when a TIF is created and how it works, because this is fundamental for our understanding of how to explain TIFs and how to attack them. So this is a real TIF in the Midwest
Tom, do me one.
ward. You can see the boundary lines. The way the boundaries are drawn are done by the Department of Planning in order to capture the money that they think they need for the specific project. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, there's 1,000 properties inside those boundaries. And what happens is when the TIF is created, the county tells the city, okay, here's the property inside the TIF you've drawn. Here's how much property tax those properties are generating right now. And that is called the base. So let's just say, for the sake of this argument, this example, that those 1,000 properties are generating $1,000 in property taxes as this process starts. All right, that is called the base. That's one of the key terms in discussing and understanding TIFs. So here is a famous illustration that explains how TIFs work. You'll see in blue is this concept called the base. That's the $1,000 that we just mentioned. So the $1,000 being collected by all those properties in the TIF is going to pay the bills for our units of government. So the units of government that fund, that rely on TIFs are many, and they include the Board of Education, the Park District, the libraries, the city colleges, the Water Reclamation District, and a few others. Can anyone tell me who is the biggest user of property taxes? You can unmute yourself and just throw it out there.
Who?
Schools, you got it.
Which unit of government? Yeah.
She said schools, public schools. You got it. So that is the biggest user of property taxes. So that's the first thing we need to note about how this process works. If you take $1 of property taxes off the table, somebody's going to be hurt. And the number one victim is the Board of Education or our public schools. Now, the other thing you want to notice is that this is flat for 23 years, right? 23 years. And what is wrong with that? So is anything going to be the same in 23 years? No, the price of everything is going to go up. So that's why this being the flat at 23 years is a problem. So if it's $1,000 here, it's going to be $1,000 here. So that's another problem. There's no adjustment over the entire 23 years of the TIF for cost of living or anything. So if the units of government are collecting $1,000 at the start of the TIF from all those properties, that's how much they're going to be collecting at the end of the 23 years.
I have a question about property taxes and
is on the books. That is amenable to the budget process and available to scrutiny to the public when the mayor presents his or her budget every year. This other stuff, this increment, is off the books. So, like I said, in the example of 1,000 properties, say it's 15 years later, and now there are, instead of $1,000, let's say there's $2,000. That's being collected right here. The increment is the difference between that's what's being collected now and what was being collected there. So the difference is $2,000. The difference is $1,000. So that's the increment. That's the increment, 1,000. And so it is every year. This process continues. How much in property taxes is that district creating versus how much it was generating at the beginning of the process? So the $1,000 is the base. That's flat for the entire 23 years, and every year the county goes through this process and it extracts the increment. So you can see this process goes on for 23 years, and it takes every penny above that $1,000 and puts it into the TIF piggy bank. And we say that money is off the books or a slush fund, and is controllable by the mayor and their allies. And this explains who gets hurt. As I said, public schools get 56 cents of the dollar, the city, 18 cents. Public parks, 6 cents, city colleges, 3 cents, and so forth. So everybody is a loser, you could say.
I also want to put in there, add my 2 cents, that not only does this money get extracted, whatever the costs from the base, all those units that aren't being covered, those costs have to be made up somehow. So in addition to money being taken out, right, by the increased value, and Tom can correct me or explain it better, the tax base, the public has to make up for that loss. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the TIFs are a big deal in the city of Chicago. You can see in 2018, about 30% of the entire city was in a TIF. It's crazy. We had 145 active TIFs in the city of Chicago in 2018. The suburbs had 303. You can see the map on the right there. And you can see how they connect, how they touch, because money can move from one TIF to another. So we got a real bad case of TIFitis.
Yeah, and so this is a chart that provides you how TIFs are to be from concept to implementation, how a TIF is created. It's a step-by-step breakdown of how the city is supposed to approve funds for redevelopment practices, proposals. There is usually, in the initial process, the initial TIF proposal is usually a conversation held between a local alderman and a prospective developers. If approved, the city sends public notice of the associated eligibility studies. So essentially, initially, there's supposed to be some type of study developed to basically show, according to the metrics, that this TIF is warranted for this area. In addition to that, they have an optional early notice piece. The Department of Community Development can hold neighborhood meetings on the proposal if they choose to. It is optional. Ideally, that eligibility study, the developer would generally, or the city would hire an independent, supposedly an independent contractor to conduct a study that compiles all the information required on the district and provide the argument that meets the standards but for test. There's like 4 or 5 different metrics that they need to minimally meet in order for this TIF to be considered. The proposal then is presented to the Community Development Commission. And then from there, they're supposed to provide the CDC must provide a public notice in the local media, as well as by mail to the property owners whose properties are going to be located in that potential TIF district, and ideally 2 weeks ahead of some type of hearing. From there, they're supposed to have a joint review board meeting. The joint review board is composed of the local taxing bodies, and they're supposed to vote on the proposal, review and vote on the proposal. If it fails, the city council must pass it with a 50% majority. Now here's where all this sort of rub is. One, the joint review board is established. The membership of the board is established. Established reps from the taxing bodies like Cook County, I believe the Chicago Public Schools, as well as the mayor's office. And so the idea is that Park District, all these people are placed on this review board, and they're supposed to review this proposal. In the city of Chicago, we know that the majority, if not all of these positions, are clearly politically connected. So whoever is going to be the proxy for County Preckwinkle will be in this board. The mayor, the Chicago Public Schools is represented by CEO, who's appointed by the mayor. And so whoever's going to sit on this board is going to probably be appointed by the CEO of the CPS. And of course, then the other bodies, the Forest Reserve, city colleges, the Park District, all these positions we know are directly controlled by the mayor of Chicago. From there, they're supposed to conduct a public hearing with public comments are permitted. And the idea of a public hearing, we saw this happen in Lincoln Park with the Lincoln Park TIF situation. We saw this happen, that they did have a public hearing. They allowed for some public comments. And it's important to understand that they do not have to take into consideration the public comments. They're not mandated to say, we will accept your comments and adjust our proposal based on your comments. They don't have to do that, this review board. They can just hear the comments and they can just speak comments, and that's it. There's nothing in the law that says you have to change your behavior or the conditions of the contract or the proposal. If it has to do with anything in terms of zoning, or if it has to do anything with land use, then it goes to the Chicago Plan Commission, and they're able to hold a hearing, and then it goes to the zoning board for appeals and stuff like that. At every step of this process, you can look at this, you can see that what we're trying to point out is that all this is controlled by the mayor's office. All these different commissions, from the CDC to the CPS to the Joint Review Board, all these positions are directly influenced and controlled by the mayor's office. The Chicago Plan Commission reviews proposals involving TIF districts as well as planned developments in manufacturing districts. Same thing with the Zoning Board of Appeals. All this is controlled by our politicians, the council, and the mayor's office. Then it goes to the broader city council meeting, and we know that the city council has a history of rubber stamping the mayor's wishes. And then, of course, every year, the one thing they do is conduct annual reporting, which then we can get the numbers from. But that's all that exists in terms of this process. Everything else is secretive. And most of the stuff that they're supposed to do, they rarely do it at any. And we've seen just recently how things just get immediately approved through the process, like what Mayor Emanuel did right before he left office to go back to Wall Street. So this is sort of how TIFs are created. And now you kind of can see how things get passed through the process. So our position is, given what you've seen so far, that we believe that, again, Chicago has TIFs running amok. That is completely a money pot. It's the mayonnaise jar. We have 145 active TIFs in 2018 in Chicago alone. Those TIFs generated $675 million in 2018. And we consider that money being stolen from the people of Chicago. We've been able to aggregate the data since 1986, even though TIFs have been around since the 70s in Chicago. We're only able to capture that much information. But we now know that $8 billion has been diverted from the units of government, the public units of government, to this private, secretive slush fund to support the affluent development in the city since 1986. And those funds come from the public services that have direct impact, and particularly in low-income communities, Black and brown communities. Thomas? You're on mute, Tom. Mute. We can't hear you.
So here's the chart that shows the history of what Jonathan was saying. TIF started in 1986 under Howard Washington. He was attempting to start something to reverse the trend of all the love and money being spent in the loop in the white communities. However, he passed away before his ideas could be implemented. And then what happened in 1991? Anybody? Politically. Unmute yourself, shout it out. What happened in 1991?
Unmute, Noah. We can hear you.
What happened in 1991, Noah?
Unmute. What happened?
Mayor Daley.
Mayor Daley, yes, sir. Thank you.
Mayor
Yes,
Daley?
that's right. So Mayor Daley II came into power, and someone in his shop figured out TIFs lickety split, and we see a rapid rise in TIFs from that day to this. As you can see right here, straight up. All right, so there's a separate analysis that we can do, in later sessions when we can dwell on this. But we believe that this TIF business here has powered the new version of the Chicago Democratic machine by funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to the developer community who don't need it. They then in turn paid off to the Democratic machine and various campaigns and war chests. So it's like money laundering. So these developers and other connected lawyers and consultants would get this money from the TIF projects, and then in turn they would send money to Mayor Daley at the HDO and aldermanic and ward committees and so forth by the millions of dollars. And this is well documented. The number one thing that the TIF Illumination Project and the Civic Lab does in this space every year, as Jonathan mentioned, is to do the annual TIF analysis of all the TIFs in Chicago. We add them up, we explain what's going on, we produce a document you can see on our website at tifreports.com, the latest analysis. Nobody does it, and everybody uses it. But the number one thing that we tell you is how much money is left over in the TIF accounts at the end of the year, which of course nobody wants us to know, but everybody should know it. And the answer at the end of 2018 was $1.5 billion. So that's how much money, and we're talking about property taxes, folks. It's your dollars, it's our dollars. That's how much money was sitting in the TIF accounts at the start of 2019. And then of course, Mayor Lightfoot tapped $300 million of that for her 2020 budget formulation. Now, how big is it in Illinois? Well, it's big. Across 559 municipalities, we got about 1,300 TIF districts. And since records have been kept back in 1981, TIFs have taken a staggering $22 billion from across the state of Illinois. Of course, Chicago being one of the biggest contributors. How big is it nationally? We wish we knew. Our estimates, conservatively, that 20,000 TIF districts take $40 billion a year. But it could be bigger. And if that's true, and on the average, a property tax dollar goes to the Board of Education about 50 cents. In some cities, it's more. This means that America's public schools are being ripped off by $20 billion every year. And of course, this affects communities of color, Black and brown communities, the worst, that rely on our public schools so heavily and don't have other sources of income to make up when this money goes away. Jonathan.
Still doing. So I was going to say, I'm highlighting our national work. Tom has been doing some great national networking, and we are engaging with and establishing partnerships around the country now. So we've been working in Ohio. We've been looking at Maryland, Baltimore, and Pennsylvania. And so we're beginning to branch out to really see what this phenomenon looks like across the country. And so I truly appreciate that national, global picture, especially now in terms of the global pandemic. We now see sort of how this has impacted the economy in other places. And then we're drilling back down into Chicago just most recently. If you're not familiar, Mary Manuel, right before he left, was able to push through this TIF here. It's the Cortland Chicago River TIF. It's a $1.3 billion let's make a deal with Sterling Bay. It includes a $400 million financing cost. All this is being paid for by us, truly, the taxpayers. And so $400 million is just for the transaction. It's a transaction financing cost alone. And all this money is going to Sterling Bay and to Wall Street And it's to build, you can see it there, it's to build, it's the proposed new TIF district is to build in that Lincoln Yard area between the 3 affluent neighborhoods. In addition to that, we now also see the second one was this so-called 78 Roosevelt Clark TIF plan, which also includes another $400 million financing cost for transactions. And that's the former Reese Michael Hospital location. And you can see that that's going to be a pretty beautiful place for all of us to live and grow in right there. So combined, you're talking about $800 million in financing costs and over $2 billion in total stuff. And so what we see now just most recently, we see the $1.1 billion TIF for 78, the $1.3 billion TIF for Sterling Bay and the Link Yards. We see that Chicago isn't broke, clearly. That's $2.4 billion slated for those 2 affluent projects. And if we get into it even further, if you remember this chart about how things are done, we find out that the Chicago TIF consultant that was hired to develop the eligibility study for these proposals to be approved by the commission. The study, it came out, the study key, an okay for Lincoln Yards, tax subsidy, the key to the massive $1 billion taxpayer subsidy for Sterling Bay, Lincoln Yards, mega development. It was a 36-page report declaring that the project met the requirements to get the money. And we find out that that consulting firm is friends with Sterling Bay and with the mayor. And so essentially the consultant was a contractor, a longtime friend and contractor of Sterling Bay and the mayor. So they basically hired their own contractor to basically rubber stamp a 36-page report. And it said essentially it was done on behalf of the city of Chicago. And so now we know that it wasn't. There was a closed deal to begin with, and that study was conducted by Sterling Bay's friends. So that, if anything, that highlights the nonsense of this. And it's all our taxpayer money. So now, just to drill it down even further, Noah and Zakia, the reality, welcome Ms. Carter, the reality is that in the same breath, in the same time frame as the city, both Mayor Emanuel and Mayor Lightfoot approved essentially this $2.4 billion affluent scheme, and for 2 affluent neighborhoods for the most part. In the same breath, they launched their incredible $250 million Invest Southwest project. And so you can see it, we broke it down for you. We do a Chicago Equity Report Card now. It's catalyzing 10 vibrant neighborhoods in the South and West Side. You can see the names from Austin to Roseland, to South Shore, to North Lawndale, New City, Inglewood, Auburn, Gresham. It encompasses almost 28,000 acres and about 490,000 residents. It's called Invest Southwest. And they're claiming to be putting in $250 million in TIF funds, and they're going to be trying to reappropriate existing budgets to make up another $250 million between private developers and the existing unit of government budget. So looking at $500 million investment into 10 neighborhoods, Black, brown, poor neighborhoods, or working class neighborhoods. Juxtapose that against the $2.4 billion in TIF funds being allocated to build a beautiful project in the Lincoln Yards, and then also the 78. And this, you can see the numbers there. We did the numbers, 303 acres for the $1 billion investments, 0 residents. And we already see that there's over almost, $2.4 billion being put into that. Of 800 million is just for transaction. Versus this Invest Southwest, a measly 250. Excuse me, Ms. Carter? Do you see that?
Yes. Yes.
So we say it's F. It's F. That right there shows us where the priorities lie in our politics, and we give the mayor, the council, an F in terms of that. In addition to that, we can continue with this. We are now in the middle of a global pandemic, and we now know that coronavirus is disproportionately killing African Americans in Cook County and in the state of Illinois. This is no surprise for many of us from the African American community. We've always sort of taken the brunt end of so-called emergency relief and disasters, from Katrina to this and prior to that. But the early data from U.S. coronavirus pandemic exposes how systemic racism and inequality puts Black and brown communities at risk, and we're paying for that price. And so essentially we are now in a position where we're saying, well, in this moment, we know there is a cash fund of $1.2 billion in the TIF accounts as we are speaking right now. Our position is that empty that cash, that TIF managed jar, and put that money into the people's response to the COVID-19. There is enough money and resources to be able to begin to provide our poor Black and brown communities and all the communities struggling in Chicago with the necessary resources for our families to not only survive this pandemic, but come out of it not losing too much ground in terms of our households, in terms of our living, in terms of our kids and our families. And we know that this city can do it because the mayor did it. The mayor, in a swipe, took $300 million out of the jar and to fill the 2019 budget. So here we are. We're moving to action. We know it can be done. The mayor approved it. Now we're going to be moving into what are the policy problems and what are the organizing opportunities we can go after as citizens of this city.
So there's a number of hooks.
We have some opportunities.
There are a number of hooks or insults that we want to offer to you. Any number of which could give you ideas for actions and ways to talk about this to your allies, friends, colleagues, and neighbors. One, the definition of blight, as we know, is meaningless. It's a loaded term charged with racism and history of structural racism in the city. And we have to say who blighted who. And we know that right up to this very day, there's redlining and predatory lending and disinvestment by design. And this whole thing is cockamamie. So they can create a blighted area in any area they want. So basically, the definition is so flexible that these areas were declared blight. The Central Loop District, LaSalle Street, $842 million in public investment in private buildings, high rises. On Halsted in Greektown, $7 million for the Mariano's grocery store. Near where I live, in arguably one of the wealthiest parts of Chicago, $8.5 million to renovate the Grossinger Superstore right over there, right across the street from the Apple store. So blighted, I can't even look at it. Two, we say that TIFs further economic inequality and racial segregation and economic apartheid. So this heat map over there is already 10 years old, but it shows that where the TIFs are being spent is in the heart of the loop, the heart of the city, which is already prospering. And that's one of the key factors of this TIFs thing. We say they hoard taxes and they do not distribute them. So if someone is telling you that a TIF is the answer to your economic problems and you're in a poor community or working class community, things aren't going so great for you, and they put a TIF on you and they say to you, this is the answer, they're lying. It's the exact opposite. So that's why we have the handcuffs. We say that the money is handcuffed and cannot leave. So the money that's collected here in this area cannot find its way to other parts of the city by law. That is unjust. So just to remind you, here are the TIFs projects in the 42nd Ward of the Loop. So every blue dot is a TIF project. You can see it's a hot spot, $842 million. Here's a few of the projects that our public taxes supported. The Randall Street Towers, the conversion of the Union Carbide building into the Hard Rock Hotel, PepsiCo's headquarters in the West Loop for $11 million. Chicago Title and Trust's headquarters across the street from the State of Illinois Center for $10 million. The Randolph Street and Oriental Theater redevelopment, 18 plus. Oh, and Sears was put in the South
Struggling
Loop.
theater company.
Right. Sears was put in this building over on State Street for almost $11 million. Oops, they moved out. Do we get our $11 million back? No, they took it with them. And as we've said before, TIFs are a sludge fund. As money sits in that pot and can be distributed when and where the mayor sees fit. These are just a few examples from the past. Now the mayor has given us a few more. And we just have a new person entering, Lauren Taylor.
Excellent.
And TIFs are a slush
Yeah.
fund, as we say. So the other way that we demonstrate the TIFs are a slush fund is that TIFs move the money around. So it's a secretive process inside a secretive process. So we already told you that TIFs take about $675 million, and about a half of that, or a little less than half of that money, is moved around, ported and distributed. So these are our figures from 2017. So of the money that was collected, almost $216 million was moved out of the TIF districts. So it's a secret wrapped in a secret. So we say it's a slush fund. Also, sadly, TIFs are corruptive influence on our weak-willed city council members. Every time we can look into the data, we discover aldermen who pass on these TIFs get money directly from people who receive the TIFs. I don't know about you, but I call that a bribe. Maybe it's a legal bribe. Carrie Austin,
And so we're, yeah.
Walter Burnett, Danny Solis, who's now gone, Brian Hopkins, all have received money from TIF developers. And this is just from a glancing look. We don't have the bandwidth to really thoroughly investigate. So these are problems. Alderman Burke, who has been indicted by the feds, partly because he's trying to peddle his influence around TIFs. And this is a headline from the Sun-Times. Caught on the wire by the FBI. I need his favor for my TIF money. So it's a corrupting influence. We don't know whether to laugh or cry. Next, we tell you that TIFs have nothing to do with economic development. So don't be fooled when the so-called experts say we need TIFs for economic development, because the truth is they actually depress economic development. And we show you a very powerful study here, which if you're interested, we can actually send you a copy of this. But TIFs are part of a much larger basket of goodies that we like to give to businesses in the name of development. And the truth is, they're just bribes, and they don't really develop anything. And we say it's time to stop this process. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. Here's a high rise at the corner of Lake Street and the river, a 50-story tower building. They got $29 million in TIF money to build this park right here, which is on a giant tube that covers the Amtrak tracks. So here's the park that got $29 million. It's operated by the Park District, but do most people even know that it's there? No, because you're walking along the street on Lake Street. This is a story above your head. So really, this is a private park operated by the city of Chicago to be used by the people in this high rise for a smoke break or lunch. And if you look around your own community for where your parks are, you'll ask yourself, could my park use some improvements, some upgrades, some extra coaches? Probably the answer is yes, but too bad. You're not going to get it. This guy got his money first. In one of the most egregious examples of TIFs, they were going to give $55 million to the DePaul Arena down by the convention center, but there was huge uproar, which we helped orchestrate in 2015. And so Mayor Emanuel switched the money from the DePaul Arena to the Marquis Marriott's Hotel, which received $16 billion in revenues the last time we looked. So that multi-billion-dollar corporation received $55 million in TIF money to build this hotel, which I'm sure is going to do very well. And to contrast that, we call your attention to the 24th Ward, the community of Lawndale, which is predominantly African-American and working class folk. That is the most TIF community in Chicago. And at one point, almost 100% of that ward was in a TIF. And all you have to do is go walk around and ask yourself, how has TIFs done for us in Lawndale? How are we doing? And the answer is not so great. And so we say that these TIFs are completely lopsided. They're robbing from the poor to give to the rich. Therefore, we come up with our key demands. Jonathan.
Right, and this also, the high contrast even more, we now know that Marriott Services, the corporation, had furloughed a huge percentage of their workforce during the global pandemic across the country. They have literally let go of, yes, I mean, we have friends who are part of that. They've let go a lot of people who've been there for 20, 30 years across the country. So that's unfortunate. And so now we're here. These are the key demands. The first one is you can go to people's COVID-19 response demands. These demands have been crafted over the past couple of weeks by a group of folks that have been meeting across the city on Zoom, looking at this whole thing through a public health lens. It's focused on actually making sure that when we come out of this pandemic with a stronger public health infrastructure, and you can check those demands out. They range from establishing a head tax to raise an additional $100 million to making sure that all schools have a nurse in every single school by 2021, to also making sure there's enough resources to make sure that families can survive this pandemic for the next 2 years. The other major demand area is abolish TIFs. And again, you can see the link, www.endtifsnow.org. Our position is, in this most immediate situation, we would like the mayor and city council to end the TIF project, end the TIF screen, take the 1.2 million that's left in the TIF managed jar and apply that to the demands. Apply that to a robust public health approach to solving this situation in Chicago. And so that's our key demands. We're looking to continue to build out and educate. We do have Chicago's Not Broke is doing really well across the city. We've sold about 4,000 copies. We've done dozens and dozens of trainings all over the city. If you are more interested in learning more about the budget and finances of your city, where money is stolen, where money is hidden, and where's the money they're not collecting, what can we do about it? Go online, get Chicago's Not Broke. It is a great teaching tool. It is a fast read. You can use that. You can do a book club with it on Zoom with your networks. You can get your networks to buy the groups that you're part of and purchase 12, 15 books. You do that, we can help. We can actually take you through a Chicago's Not Broke 101 on Zoom, and we can help break down the book for you with your book club if you would like. So please continue to educate yourself. We know Chicago's not broke. We know there's ample resources in this city, both human capacity and economic capacity. And so please, it's time to get activated. And again, if you're interested in leading and coordinating this campaign at any level, we are recruiting leaders. We are recruiting people who will be willing to take this to their ward, to their neighbors. You can check that out right there. Starting Monday, April 20th, we're gonna be doing a Monday evening weekly hangout. It's an opportunity for everybody just to stay connected and check in across the city. So we're gonna create some space for people to get updates about the campaign and also share what's happening in their ward, what's happening in their block, what's happening in their neighborhood. Stay connected is critical in this time of social distancing. Starting on April 22nd, if you go back to that, Tom, we are having a bi-weekly workshop. This workshop will be bi-weekly. So if you get out to your networks and your people and you're like, yo, you gotta take this workshop, every other Wednesday, we're gonna be doing this TIF 101 until we feel like there's enough people who've got the the knowledge skills of this, and we can build out from there. Also, planning campaign strategy sessions begin this Saturday. This one is this Saturday, I believe at 10 a.m. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah.
So I think it's 10 a.m. this Saturday. That's the space created for those people who sign up, who are committed to say, you know what, it's time to activate. It's time to put pressure on our politicians to release the $1.2 billion to go directly to support relief efforts for all Chicagoans, particularly those neighborhoods that are hit the hardest in Chicago. It's time to change this body of politics. Join us. We want to do a 50 ward